solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Over the glittering Hollywood hills, there lingers an invisible shadow, the dark epoch of McCarthyism. To this day, the blacklist haunts the many film artists whose careers it touched. But out of that shameful period came a triumph, a work of art that will outlast the shadow, a film called Salt of the Earth. Far from the glamorous movie capital in a totally opposite world, a copper mine near Silver City, New Mexico became the setting for a movie made under extraordinary conditions. Blacklisted filmmakers joined hands with the progressive and militant mine mill smelter workers and their families to create a film classic. These people, most of them Chicanos, their lives inextricably tied to the mines, were in fact the salt of the earth. This 1954 movie recreated the sights, sounds, and emotions of a bitter 15-month-long strike. The miners fought to gain a better life, safety on the job, and decent living conditions within the company town.
Accidents are costly to everyone, to the company most of all. I see no reason to treat the occasion like a paid holiday. Suppose we all get back to work. Martin?
All right, fellas, the excitement's over. Let's get to it.
Ahora, yo creo. Sí. Sí.
What are they saying?
No savvy.
Barnes, what about it? Tell the men to get back to work.
They don't work for me. I work for them.
For this vanguard group of filmmakers, the miners became actors, reliving their own determination to stand up to the company bosses.
It's up to you, brothers.
Sí. Sí.
See.
Sí. 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 Sí.
See.
Sí.
See.
Gente! ¡Páralo!
Meanwhile, another struggle had already begun in a better-known company town, Hollywood. In 1945, two craft unions fought for power in the movie business. One was considered left-wing, the other was controlled by studio heads and infiltrated by organized crime. At the dawn of the Cold War, the mob-influenced union crushed the other, accusing it of being run by communists. The seeds were planted for an atmosphere of name-calling hysteria and guilt by association that would lead to the Hollywood blacklist. 1947, a plane load of movie stars landed in Washington, D.C. to protest the House Un-American Activities Committee's investigation of communist trends in the motion picture industry. Among the outraged were Danny Kaye, Humphrey Bogart, and Lauren Bacall. HUAC recognized the publicity to be gained from a government probe into Hollywood. This highly dramatized anti-communist crusade later led to similar investigations and blacklists in almost every professional field. Citing the First Amendment, 19 subpoenaed film industry witnesses planned to refuse to cooperate with the committee, but others came forward as friendly witnesses, among them Screen Actors Guild representative and future U.S. Senator George Murphy, who appeared before HUAC with Guild President Ronald Reagan. Reagan's presidency of the Screen Actors Guild spanned both the Cold War and the blacklist.
Calling the House Un-American Activities Committee to order, Chairman J. Parnell Thomas of New Jersey opens an inquiry into possible communist penetration of the Hollywood film industry. The committee is seeking to determine if Red Party members have reached the screen with subversive propaganda. Mr. Thomas takes an impartial stand in his opening talk.
I want to emphasize at the outset of these hearings that the fact that the Committee on Un-American Activities is investigating alleged communist influence and infiltration in the moving picture industry must not be considered or interpreted as an attack on the industry itself.
A long list of prominent motion picture witnesses appear before the committee. Speaking for the films, Eric Johnston, president of the Motion Picture Association, talks frankly concerning the attitude of the producers.
We're not responsible for the political or economic ideas of any individual, but we are responsible for what goes on the screen. We guard that with great care. If communists have attempted to inject their propaganda into the motion picture, they have failed miserably.
Mind you, do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth?
The committee went on to hear from volunteer witnesses like actor Adolphe Menjou. The arrogant brutality of his words typified the mood.
I believe that 95% of the people in California are decent, honest American citizens. The Communist Party is a minority, but a dangerous minority. I would move to the state of Texas if it ever came here, because I think the Texans would kill them on sight.
Hollywood drew the crowds. One of the 19 subpoenaed witnesses was Screenwriters Guild founder John Howard Lawson, who tried to hold back the shadow of the coming blacklist. He refused to respond to questions, but offered this statement: "I am proud to be singled out for attack by men who are obviously out to stifle ideas and censor communication. Artists, scientists, and educators are always the first victims of attack by those who hate democracy." Lawson and 9 others were held in contempt of Congress for exercising the right of free speech. They became known as the Hollywood 10, and in 1950 were jailed. Ironically, their accuser, Chairman Thomas, was imprisoned for graft that same year. The moguls of the film industry met at New York's Waldorf Astoria and returned to Hollywood to declare that only the 10 would be sacrificed.
We will forthwith discharge or suspend without compensation those in our employ, and we will not re-employ any of the 10 until such time as he is acquitted or has purged himself of contempt and declares under oath that he is not a communist. We request Congress...
But the 10 were only the beginning. Scores more followed.
...to rid itself of subversive, disloyal elements.
When the second series of hearings began, I was a logical choice to be summoned. And as soon as Howard Hughes, for whom I was working at the time, heard that I was subpoenaed, I was fired the same day.
Because he refused to cooperate with the committee, Jarrico found all doors closed to him. Still expressing his political beliefs, still determined to continue his work, Jarrico formed the Independent Producers Company. His partner, the late director Herbert Biberman, had been one of the Hollywood 10. Together, they vowed to make their own films, concentrating on social issues. Later screenwriter Michael Wilson, who had just the previous year won an Oscar for A Place in the Sun, joined them. And it was here in New Mexico, in a dusty mining town, that the blacklisted filmmakers came to practice their art. Traveling through Grant County, Jarrico learned of Local 890 and its strike against Empire Zinc. The Brotherhood was forbidden by law to picket, and the company almost broke the strike. But the entire town rallied. Wives and children took up the struggle. It was an extraordinary story of American life that the Hollywood studios would never have touched.
I had come back and told my colleagues with some excitement about this fantastic event in which the women had taken over the picket line and were winning a strike, and they'd gotten excited about it, and we had persuaded Mike Wilson to write it, and he went down there while the strike was still in progress, and that's how the film was born. But it was born at a time when we were looking for such material, for such subjects.
Here was a subject that had the built-in elements of a powerful social and personal drama. Air Force veteran Quentin Jenks, an organizer sent by the Mine Mill Union, has never forgotten the impact of his experience.
When I came to Grant County, I really was very much unaware. I knew that there was a need for somebody to try to rebuild a union that the companies had smashed here. What I was unaware of was that there was a whole enormous struggle of not only workers, but of a whole people, the Chicano people, the Mexican-American people, struggling for their full dignity and pride in themselves and in their leadership and in their culture. They had the idea that there had to be an Anglo as a go-between, that the companies, being all dominated by Anglos, would not talk to Mexican-American or Chicano leadership. So I was convinced that my number one task was to work myself out of a job, to reach the point where I was no longer needed.
The union leaders faced the probability of a long strike with uncertainty. No one knew what it would bring, what it would do to the members and their kin.
We began to involve the whole families in the union because we needed their understanding. Previously, wives had been excluded from the union, and they knew nothing of what the issues on the job were, why all of a sudden a strike took place.
Do you remember the time that we had a little reception for Clint and Virginia at Silver City?
Virginia Chacon, wife of a union leader, and Angie Sanchez lived through it all.
Virginia says, well, we're here to help you, but we want you, brothers and sisters, to do your part, you know. And when she said, do your part, you know, I just didn't know what she meant.
You didn't know what to do?
Because I didn't know what the union was.
After 6 months, an anti-picketing injunction threatened to break the strike. The wives, who had not even known what a union was, took over from the men. In a society where the women traditionally took a back seat, they were suddenly thrust to the foreground along with their children. Their husbands' view of them, as well as their view of themselves, would be forever changed. Emerging among the women were strong leaders like Mrs. Milano, whose husband had died of miner's lung. In her broad-brimmed hat under the desert sun, she marshaled the picketing women, often being the first carted off to jail. The sheriff, Leslie Goforth, was stunned by the events that forced him to lock up scores of women and children. Like many others, miner Benny Montez had a difficult time accepting his wife's new and dangerous role.
I voted against the women's joining the picket line. We had already been in trouble through the courts, and I was afraid that it was going to get just out of hand.
Benny, I voted for it because I want the people to learn. And I knew, I had the confidence that these women would win a strike like they did.
But victory wasn't easy. Women came from as far away as 50 miles to lend their support. And when warrants were issued for their arrest, the threat of jail only made their resolve grow stronger. While their husbands looked on, the wives faced increasing violence as they covered the picket line in 2 shifts. The company scabs were not about to go easy on them. The sheriff followed orders with the muscle of his deputized goon squad.
All of a sudden, there comes about 4 or 5 cars full of scabs trying to cross our picket lines. And we used to stop them. And some of them used to get out and go to our tent to follow the rest of the women where they were fighting. And we used to have straight pins with us to defend ourselves because we couldn't get them away from us. They were trying to beat us and hit us with whatever they could. So we had these straight pins, and we used to stick them on their butts. That's the only place we used to do it, because we were accused of doing something else with those pins, but we never did.
The women and children suffered many injuries as the skirmishes continued. These confrontations, recorded by deputies for the sheriff and for the company, were also witnessed by the blacklisted Michael Wilson.
When we saw Mr. Wilson up there in the little hill sitting down, we thought he was a scab. And we always kept an eye on him. We always was watching him, what he was doing, what time he came, what time he went. And we were always wondering what he was doing. We thought he was a company man, that he was writing down names to take us women to jail like they used to do. That's what we thought when we saw Mr. Wilson. But after that, we knew that he was writing a story about the strike. We let him come down and drink coffee with us and talk to us. He asked a lot of questions, and we answered them. Everything that was true, we told him what was going on in there.
As he observed the strike from that hilltop, Wilson decided to let his script become the first tentative link between blacklisted Hollywood filmmakers and striking New Mexico miners.
And so Mike read the script to us. And we were just very sorry, but we had to reject because there were a lot of things in the script that he had written that we didn't like, and we just couldn't accept, you know. We wanted the real thing. He was going to write a a story about us, about our people in Grand County, the strikers, and it was going to be about a struggle.
By absorbing their feelings and experiences, Michael Wilson created two authentic leading characters, portrayed by real-life Union President Juan Chacon and distinguished Mexican actress Rosaura Revueltas. Michael Wilson.
The leading characters were inventions of mine. There was no one Esperanza, although you might say there were half a dozen of them. And in the same way that Ramon is not exactly like the real man, Juan Chacon, but enough like him that he is representative of the group.
Herbert was testing one after another for the lead, and no one was quite right. And both Rosaura and I felt that there was almost, well, as we said in that day, a strength and simplicity in Ramon that we saw in Johnny Chacon that was almost a kind of a, well, we laughingly said a Mexican Humphrey Bogart.
When Herbert Beaver gave me the script for Salt of the Earth, he handed it out to me and he said, take this and go up to the hill and look at the rocks and learn it, study it, so you can be an actor in Salt of the Earth. And I read it and I said to the rocks, well, I'll be darned. I'm supposed to be an actor in a film.
Juan Chacon has been elected president of Local 890 more than a dozen times.
To be a president of a union was one thing, but to become the star of a film was something beyond his experience. But Herbert worked with him and worked with him. And finally, in some of the scenes, particularly I'm remembering the one in which Ramon has a battle with the foreman, and he became Johnny Chacon, who in real life had had such a battle. And we had to sort of calm him down after the whole scene was over with, because he just relived this whole experience from the beginning to the end.
They were simply reenacting out of their own emotions and out of their own experience those things which meant the most to them. Will Geer, as a Hollywood actor, was a unique casting, I believe, because Will had always lived as a folk personality, and he related to the working people. He saw himself as one of them, and that's why he comes through true, I believe.
Well, I played the part of Consuelo, the wife of a miner.
Angie Sanchez played a pivotal role.
And I enjoyed working, in the movie. And if I had to do this all over again, I would be happy to do it all over again.
The ladies have been talking about sanitation. And we were thinking if the issue is equality, like you say it is, then maybe we ought to have equality in plumbing too. I mean, maybe we could make it a strike demand. Some of the ladies thought it might be a good idea to have a ladies' auxiliary. Well, we'd like to help out if we can.
These three areas of labor's rights, minority rights, women's rights, merged in the event and merged in the beautiful screenplay that Michael Wilson wrote, merged in Herbert Biberman's direction, merged in the performances as a collective effort to say some things that had, I felt, to be said.
But anti-communist zealot Roy Brewer crusaded to stop the production of Salt of the Earth and thwart Jericho at every turn. Brewer was in the hierarchy of the dominant film craft union, the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees. Advisor to several ultra-conservative motion picture and political watchdog organizations, Brewer was a man of power. As union representative, he accompanied Ronald Reagan, shown here on his first visit to the White House. Union Representative Roy Brewer.
There was in this community an active effort that's absolutely traceable to the Soviet Union to use the American motion picture as an instrument of softening up the world for communism. Now, as a matter of degree, it was very subtle. And for 10 years, the officers of the Screenwriters Guild were under the domination of the Communist Party until the hearings of 1947. During that time, they began to change the minds, the creative minds of the people who made these pictures. And they didn't do it by selling them communism. They got them to accept the idea that it was the obligation of a writer to put a message in the films, you see.
Well, the studio reluctance to make message movies started long before the Blacklist. And Brewer's tribute to our cleverness in manipulating the culture of America is undeserved. We were unable to get anything more than the most moderate kind of reform messages into our films, and you know, if we thought we got some women treated as human beings rather than as sex objects, we thought it was a big victory. And in fact, one of the reasons we made Salt of the Earth after we were blacklisted was to commit a crime worthy of the punishment, having already been punished for subverting the American films. It was all ridiculous.
To support our wartime ally, Hollywood made many pro-Soviet message movies. Song of Russia, co-written by Paul Jarrico, starred Robert Taylor, who later denounced the film before HUAC. Gregory Peck's first screen role was in Days of Glory, in which he played a Russian guerrilla fighter. And Dana Andrews portrayed a Soviet pilot in Lillian Hellman's The North Star. But with the advent of the Cold War, such films, among them Mission to Moscow, became an embarrassment to those who made them. Socially aware films were now reviled. The Grapes of Wrath showed the seamy side of American life, according to industry spokesman Eric Johnston, who also claimed films like The Best Years of Our Lives should not be made anymore.
Even Salt of the Earth, which is a message film, which does have something very definite to say, could say it only because insofar as it reflected some basic human truths or some basic social truths. You can't invent messages that are separated from reality. And when they tried to, as in the case of the anti-communist films, the result was laughable.
I Was a Communist for the FBI was one of the 35 anti-communist box office failures cranked out by Hollywood. So too was Walk East on Beacon Street with George Murphy, former friendly witness. Popular stars Dana Andrews and Gene Tierney couldn't make The Iron Curtain a box office success. It was okay to make flops, but not a film like Salt of the Earth.
Congressman Jackson, a member of the Un-American Activities Committee, the one who had denounced us on the floor of Congress, wrote to different people saying, what can be done to stop the making of this film? Among the people he wrote to was Howard Hughes, who said, we can stop them in the labs, we can stop them in the sound studios, we can stop them in the cutting rooms. They do not have the equipment and the technical manpower necessary to complete this film. And he outlined, he blueprinted the exact conspiracy that was directed against us in the effort to stop the completing of this film.
Well before its entry into the Congressional Record of March 19, 1953, the Hughes message against the defiant production of Salt of the Earth had reached all levels of the motion picture industry. In fear of reprisals, many skilled professionals who had already signed to work on the film backed out.
They then sought help from Mexico. They went to Figueroa, who was a leading Mexican cameraman, and they wanted to bring him into the United States, but the Mexican government refused permission, and the United States would not grant visa. I understand, I didn't know it for a fact, but I understand that what happened was that the Hollywood local put some pressure on the Mexican local and on the Mexican government not to allow them to come into the country. As a result, what happened was that they had to go to New York and find documentary cameramen, which they eventually did.
Cameraman Leonard Stark took the risky assignment. In January 1953, exactly 1 year after the strike had ended, director Herbert Biberman began filming.
People who had already been killed and were supposed to be lying down dead on their feet and engaged in an activity which by definition was subversive. We were making a movie, and we were supposed to not make movies. They had told us definitely we were finished. So the moment the news got out, or got in the hands of the people who had been waging this campaign to blacklist people, then at that moment it became a we became a big target.
A telephone call came, and the man said, "I want to talk to Biberman." And I said, "Mr. Biberman has retired for the night. Who's speaking?" He said, "Who are you?" And I identified myself as production man. And he said, "Listen," he said, "you're all going out in black boxes if you don't get out of the county in 24 hours. I said, "What?" I said, "Just a minute, I can't hear you." And I signaled to the cameraman to pick up the extension telephone. I wanted somebody to also be a witness. And the man repeated the message verbatim. They put a call through to the governor in Santa Fe and said, "Look, Governor, we want police protection for the company. And if you don't have the police to protect this company, to finish this film, we promise you that we will have 10,000 miners marching out of the mines tomorrow morning armed. If you want civil war in New Mexico, you're asking for it."
State police averted a bloodbath. Then came a devastating ploy aimed at Rosora Revueltas. Seized by immigration officials on the trumped-up charge that her passport lacked the proper seal, she was driven to El Paso and detained for 10 days. She recalls her interrogation. Was I a communist? Were the people I was working with communists? Was this a communist film? For the first time I was frightened, not for myself, but for the picture. At the court hearing, a government attorney described her as a dangerous woman. This acclaimed actress was deported, never again to work in the United States. Her final scenes were shot with a stand-in.
Every conceivable obstacle was thrown in our path. And the fact that we were able to complete the film despite these obstacles was a very heady experience. It was a triumphant experience.
All right, girls. I'm going to give you a choice. You can go home or go to jail. No ifs, ands, or buts.
Among the many blacklisted artists and technicians Jericho attracted to the production was actor Will Geer. He portrayed the town's sheriff.
Okay, point them out. That one, Teresa Vidal. She's the leader.
You're under arrest. Homer the Hoosegow. What shall it be?
Keep marching, sisters. Let's show some discipline. But Teresa, don't charge us with resisting arrest. Keep marching, sisters. Keep marching.
Mrs. Salazar, the old one.
Participation in the film, as in the actual strike, meant personal sacrifice. After a shift in the mine and attention to family duties, a day of work would begin on the movie set.
Ruth Barnes. She's the organizer's wife. And Alvarez, the pretty one. And that one, with the baby, she's Ramon Quintero's wife. He doesn't like her being here.
After Rosora's deportation, Herbert Biberman staged her remaining scenes so that close-ups already filmed could be resourcefully edited with her stand-in shots.
Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us.
With a second set of hearings, 200 others had been sacrificed to the blacklist. Among them was composer and musician Sol Kaplan, who challenged the committee.
When I appeared in front of the committee, Congressman Jackson, who mispronounced Shostakovich's name, wanted to know something about my feelings about Shostakovich, who he got all mixed up in many ways. And so I said, I'd like to ask him to identify one work of Shostakovich's. Could he just name me? Did he know a symphony, just the number of a symphony? And he was at a complete loss. So that, obviously, in terms of that, was just nonsense. What could I do musically that would be subversive? Play the International? I'd only play the International if it was being called for it about the Russian Revolution, when the International would have been played. I never got such a film.
A veteran composer, Kaplan read the script and offered his talents. Paul Jarrico drove him to a secret editing room in the Hollywood Valley for this first glimpse of a partially assembled film.
There was a point when nobody knew whether they were being followed by the FBI, by Brewer's Boys, or bruisers, per se. But the fact is, being followed we were, and throughout the making of this film, this was one of the greater hazards. And in any case, we lost our tail. It sounds like a B picture, but that's true. We did lose our tail, and we got to this place, and I went into this rather long, lean room, and that was the editing room, and it was everything room. That was where Salt was. At this point, I was able to see a few reels for the first time. I thought what was captured on film was a lot better than I expected, because I had heard such terrible stories about it, that this was not gotten, and that this one left the film, and another one left the film, and that there was an FBI cutter in originally, and I don't know, the whole thing just sounded disastrous. So that what I saw, I knew was not more than salvageable, but would be the historic film that it turned out to be.
Surrounded by FBI and Union spies, editing progressed. The time came to record the musical score. To do so, Kaplan would lead the orchestra while watching projected scenes. But the blacklisted artists in Salt were too well known, and no Hollywood sound studio would let them in.
Paul Jarrico became Paul Jacobs and went to New York for a remake of the musical score of a Mexican film entitled Vaya con Dia. This was the facade. Now, I had to think of something here, which was, I can't show the film, because the minute you show even the dupe for the musical dupe, everybody's going to recognize what it's all about.
Kaplan couldn't be provided with headsets for audible click tracks, which are tempo beats for cues, so he invented visual clicks using blank film.
Along those lines, in order not to see the film, I designed leader with lines and punches for cues. So the film was recorded looking at lines and punches, and it sometimes made me a little punchy because you didn't have a scene in front of you, and all I could do was just trust to the fact that they were put in the right place, and I was hitting it exactly right while I was doing it at the time, recording it. You know, the fear that anything at any time could take place was enormous.
Many artists and technicians worked at night in secret to finish special effects and lab work. Prince of the film completed, Salt of the Earth was ready to be shown, but premiere theaters categorically refused to touch it. Second-run houses, intimidated by major studios who threatened to withhold their films, also balked. Finally, in New York, 2 courageous neighborhood theater owners agreed to run it. Leading critics reviewed it. Bosley Crowther of the New York Times said, "Michael Wilson's tautly muscled script develops considerable personal drama." Time magazine praised it as a work of vigorous art. Independent Film Journal as hard-hitting and dramatic. The labor paper Ford Facts called it a great film, and Variety described it as a good, emotion-charged piece of work. The critical acclaim was even greater in Europe, where in France it was awarded the Crystal Star for Best Foreign Film of the Year. Rosaura Revueltas and Michael Wilson accepted, without Herbert Biberman and the others who were denied passports. And back in Silver City,
it created a very big interest in the community, in spite of the fact that it was so red-baited here locally. Nevertheless, the commotion that the film created, you know, makes you feel that people do want to see it very badly.
Paul Jarrico.
Even after we had a successful opening in New York, with good reviews and terrific box office for 10 weeks, we couldn't book theaters. When a theater wanted to book our picture, they were told, if you play this picture, you'll never get another MGM picture, you'll never get another Paramount picture, etc.
some milk for the baby, so what's all the belly aching about?
That milk is no good.
In the weeks prior to the world premiere, SALT was privately screened for some 3,000 people representing trade unions and professional, civic, women's, and minority groups. Audience reaction was overwhelmingly emotional and enthusiastic. Without question, there was a demand for this film to be seen.
You'll be back with your families in an hour. All you got to do is to sign a pledge not to go back on the picket line.
Don't sign nothing for the stinker. No.
The film projectionist locals sent out the word not to handle the film. Acts of conspiracy and restraint of trade were openly publicized and reported. Union Representative Roy Brewer and 60 other individuals and companies were taken to court by Jericho and his associates.
I was a personal plaintiff. Went to a jury trial in New York in 1963, but we won. We were acquitted, but we were accused of conspiracy.
Individual representatives of the companies did testify that they had, in fact, denied us services, tried to stop the making of the film, but they claimed that they did it as individual companies, not as part of a conspiracy. And we had not been able to prove conspiracy, and we lost the case. Mr. Brewer seems to feel that this was an acquittal. Outside of the United States, the picture has become a classic. In France, it's revived very often, and in China, it's very well known. It's played whenever a country becomes free, it imports Salt of the Earth. That happened in Spain not long ago. It happened in Portugal a little earlier. It happened in Greece when the colonels were overthrown. So the market for Salt of the Earth seems to be increasing, fortunately.
For the movie makers and miners who made and participated in SALT, life continued, work continued. It was the right to work, the American right to make a better life that had brought them together in the first place. Labor organizer Clinton Jenks, who shared those ideals and helped the miners win the strike, went on to other causes, eventually becoming professor of economics at San Diego State. From time to time, Clint returns to Silver City for a reunion.
Now there are hundreds of leaders like Johnny Chacon doing a magnificent job of representing the workers and achieving heights that they hadn't dreamed were possible when they start out.
There he is.
Juan Chacon has served his people for over 30 years. The old mine mill union no longer exists, and today Local 890 is part of the United Steelworkers. The local struggles for autonomy, and Chacon hopes the new generation will continue to progress. Silver City has seen many changes. Today the mines are vast open pits. More and more of the land is being eaten away, and Juan wonders what will happen to his people when the copper is gone. The union membership is still mostly Chicanos, a few are women. They have made a better life, but mining is still hard work.
We've had a century of struggles, labor struggles in this country of ours.
Right.
And we've had times when working people have had practically uprisings, you know, when they've reached kind of a peak of strength and solidarity and working together and a feeling of their interdependence on one another, like we did here in Grant County. The thing I'm trying to struggle with is how do we get the message, you know, to the new guy who's coming on the job, so he won't have to learn all these through his own experience, you know, of getting beat over the head, of getting fired, of getting burned.
These younger men are going to have to learn that organized labor had to struggle and fight for what we've got now.
In the old times, it was different to now, because these young guys, when they come into work, they got a union contract, and they got good conditions to work and everything.
We might be able to develop something whereby the local union...
In numbers, the women's membership in the union has little significance. But the women are seeing the old roles make way for the new. Juan and Virginia Chacon named their daughter Esperanza, who was the infant baptized in the film. Esperanza, whose name means hope, works for the union.
afterwards, I believe they started fading off. They didn't. To me, I guess they thought that since they had already won the Empire Zing strike, that there was nothing else, you know, for them to do.
All right, where's his baby? Little girl.
Their saga immortalized, Michael Wilson, 2 years before his death in 1978, reflected about the film's impact on the community.
The making of the film consolidated the gains that they had made socially and personally, particularly in relation to the treatment of women. That because of the film, there was less regression to the old ways than one might anticipate.
It made me so very happy when I saw the change in the men, you know.
The peak of struggle that once unified the women has yet to be reached again. For the women, the long-term gains have been subtle and personal rather than sweeping, but they are enormous in comparison to neighboring communities.
For my part, me and my husband, we got closer together, and my belief that the other women did too.
We are sisters. We are forever friends. And we may have gone through unpleasantness because of the nature of our film, but it's I suppose it's like giving birth to a child. There's always pain, but you forget the pain and you only remember the beautiful moments that one lived with these people for a good length of time.
It is the only film of the many that I've been associated with that ever got better instead of worse over the years. I look at it now and from time to time, and the things that used to make me squirm, certain technical deficiencies that were the result of the pressures put upon us, no longer seem to matter at all. They seem totally irrelevant.
And we had our fights. It wasn't a question of everybody, you know, patting each other on the back. None of that. But what finally came out, the product, the production, the beauty of that film and the meaning of the film, with all its technical faults and so forth and problems, will stand, I think, in the annals of cinematography, or cinema, I should say, forever.
In 1976, Michael Wilson received the Writers Guild Laurel Award, and in accepting warned the new generation to never forget what he called the Great Witch Hunt. Paraphrasing a famous quotation, he said, "I fear that unless you remember this dark epoch and understand it, you may be doomed to replay it." In the face of being attacked as un-American, the blacklisted filmmakers went on to truly commit a crime to fit the punishment. They joined with oppressed miners to create a crime called Salt of the Earth. Wilson predicted that the country would face a new crisis before the end of the century, wherein diversity of opinion will be labeled disloyalty, and extraordinary pressures brought to bear against the free expression of ideas. A time when writers will be told to conform to government policy, and when workers will be pressured to suffer without recourse. In effect, Michael Wilson and his colleagues passed on a mandate to the new generation to look at the crime of Salt of the Earth, to understand its meaning, and to have the courage to commit it again.
The sweat of the man, because the sweat is salty, and the dirt where they dig to get the ore out. That's what I thought it meant.
We didn't know then that we had won the strike. But our hearts were full. And when Ramon said,
Thanks, sisters and brothers. Esperanza, thank you for your dignity. You were right. Together, we can push everything up with us as we go.
then I knew we had won something they could never take away. Something I could leave to my children, and they, the salt of the earth, would inherit it.